Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my scripting tutorial. Today we'll be getting into the actual basics of scripting / coding. Before we get into that, I'm going to quickly tell you how to rename a part. So let me get a part here and just make it a little more unique for our convenience. Alright, so in order to rename a part, you have to go into the Explorer, find the object you are looking for, right click, click rename, and then you can name your part to whatever you want. But alternatively, you can also go into the properties and change the name property over here. And when you change it, you can see that it changes in the Explorer as well. Now, we can rename parts manually like you just saw here, but what if we want the game to automatically do it for us? So this is where scripts will come in, and you might remember from my last video when I taught you how to insert a script. As a refresher, you have to right click, insert object, and then just click on script. Alternatively, one thing I forgot to mention is you can also just hit the plus button and then find the script in here. Now, first of all, what are scripts? Well, scripts are basically the instructions that you tell a game to follow. And in order to edit our script, in case you aren't already in the script editor tab, or in case the script tab is closed, all you have to do is go up to the script and then double click on it, and you'll go into what's called the script editor. Now let me explain this layout a bit. You may notice that there are these numbers on the side, and when I create new lines by hitting return, there are even more numbers. These numbers are the order in which the game will execute instructions, meaning that the order of execution for the script goes downwards. Now what we want to do is we want to rename what this part is called right now, poll, into something else here. So how would we do that in our script? So in order to reference poll in our script, the way it works is you have to type in a parent and then put a period, and then you type in the child of the parent or the property of the parent. So the first thing we need to type in is game, and game is basically the top level parent. Then you follow it up with a period, and you type in the child of game or the property of game. In this case, we want the child of game because we want to reference workspace, as that's where poll is. Then we type in another period, and since poll is a child of workspace, we can just type in poll here, and now we have a reference to the object. Now we need to reference the property this time, so we follow it up with a period, and then type in name to reference the name property of poll. And in order to actually set it, we need to put an equal sign like this, and then put in quotation marks, and now we put in the new name that we want for poll. In order to test this, we have to click run, or if you have this little arrow here, we can also hit play. The only difference between the two is that run doesn't load a character in, so it's much more faster for testing. So I'm going to hit run here. And if you look at the workspace in our game that's run, you can see that poll is now called red brick. But you might be wondering, why is this in quotation marks? Well, that's because the quotation marks is to help the game know that this is what's called a string. And a string is basically a bunch of text. So let me just put a comment here. You can do this by pressing 2 dashes. So this data type is called a string, and essentially some properties can only hold specific data types. So now I'm going to go over a list of all the other data types that you definitely should know. As you can recall, this is what's called a string, and it's basically just text. And then the next data type is what's called a boolean, and this can either be true or this can either be false. And then the next data type is just numbers in general. It can be this number, it can be negative numbers, it can be decimals. And the last data type, very similar to a number, is what's called an integer. And the only difference between an integer and a number is that a number can have decimals, but an integer cannot. Integers are also informally called int for short. So using these data types, we're able to set properties. So remember that in order to change a property, we need to give it a specific data type that is compatible with. So in the case of name, remember that a string holds text, so string would work in order to change the name of objects. However, if we wanted to, for an example, change the anchored property of poll we would need to use a boolean. And you can tell that we need a boolean for anchored because when you go into the anchored property, you can see that it's a tick mark. And anything with a tick mark is essentially a boolean. As for numbers, one property I can think of that uses numbers is transparency. And transparency ranges from 1 to 0, where 1 is invisible and 0 is visible. So if I want to make a part 50% transparent, I'd have to use the decimal 0.5, which is, remember, a number. So as you can see, if I were to run the game right now, you can see that all these changes were applied. Alright, so we've learned about strings, booleans, numbers, and integers, but there are also a few special data types for some special properties that we may not use all the time. So let's say that I wanted to change the position of pole, and the position is basically the XYZ coordinate of where they are in the world. So in order to change the position of pole, I would need to use a special data type called vector3, and you create a vector3 by typing in vector3.new x coordinate, y coordinate, z coordinate. So if I were to put real numbers, let's just say I put 10, 20, 30. And if I run the game, you can see that it's moved to the coordinate there. So this is a special data type called a C-frame, and in order to set a C-frame, it's very similar to vector3, where we just put an X, a Y, and a Z. But what makes a C-frame different from a vector3 is a C-frame has orientation, so you would also have an RX, an RY, and an RZ. Rotation is a bit complicated, so we won't use that, but just remember that the difference between a C-frame and a vector3 is that C-frame can affect the rotation, vector3 only affects the position. So if I did what I did last time, it should basically do the same thing. So when I hit run, you can see it was the same thing as vector3. Now what if I wanted to change the color of pole? And the color data type is typed like color3 dot from RGB, and then you have the RGB here. If you don't know how to type in an RGB, you can also use this color wheel and it will do it for you. Now if I play the game, you can see that now the brick color is different. One thing to note is that you don't have to use this format and this format in order to reference C-frame and color. We can also reference it from another part. So I've quickly created a part here, and what I can do is I can actually reference the part in my script, and then I can ask for its C-frame property. And what it's going to do is it's going to make pole's C-frame the same as the part's C-frame. I can also do the same thing here by getting its color property. And you can see that when I run the game and I check inside, because this part's way too big, pole has become the same color as the part, and it also went into the same position as the part. So now that you know how to set properties based on their data types and also set properties based on another object's properties, I'm going to go over a few other useful things to know when you're coding. So you might recall that when you create a new script, there's a line of code that says print hello world. But when you run the game, it doesn't seem to do anything. So what is this print? Well, what a print does is it creates a message and sends it to what's called the output. And we can access the output by clicking view and then click output here. And you'll notice that hello world is actually printed in the output. And every time we run the game, hello world is printed. Okay, so we can write a message to the output, but how is that useful at all? Well, we can use prints to tell us a lot of information. For an example, if I want to know the specific C-frame of pole right now, but I can't check in the game, what I can do is I can type it in here by typing game.workspace pole.cframe. And if I click run, you can see that it gives me the actual C-frame of pole. So one other thing we can use print for is to help us do math. In Roblox, you can do math by using the math operators like plus, minus, multiply, which is an asterisk, divide, and also power. And let me just assign these values a bit randomly. And you can see that when I hit run, Roblox actually does the math for me. And this is good for when you're calculating things like damage for a weapon, for example. So now here's a problem. As your script gets longer with more lines of code, it becomes even more annoying to refer to an object over and over again. Thankfully, there's actually a way to simplify this, not only to make it easier for us, but also to make it more efficient for Roblox to run our game. And what we're going to use to simplify all of these lines of code is what's called a variable. And a variable is basically a reference to anything you can put in. In order to create a variable, what we want to do is we have to first type in local, and then we can give a name for our variable, which in this case, I'll just call it pull part. And then you can set the variable with what you want to reference. In our case, we're trying to reference pull, so we don't have to type it over and over again. Now, all I have to do is replace all of these with pull part, and the next time I want to change something, all I have to do is type in pull part, and then I can change it. So that's all we'll learn about today. To summarize, we learned about data types like strings, booleans, numbers, integers, as well as special data types like vector3, C-frame, and color to set the properties of our objects. We also learned about how to use prints as well as how to create variables in order to make our work easier. So that's all I'm going to cover for this video. In the next video, I'll be talking about if statements. So yeah, bye.